The first disappearance was reported on a Monday. A group of 6 tourists had ventured into the Maasai Mara National Reserve at dawn, accompanied by a seasoned guide named Kamau. They were expected back at the central lodge by sundown but never returned. Initial search efforts uncovered their abandoned safari vehicle near the Olololo escarpment. The engine was dead, the radio silent. Inside, the air reeked of something sharp and metallic, blood. 3 days later, another group, this one a quartet of amateur wildlife photographers, disappeared without a trace in the same area. Panic gripped the local guides and rangers, who whispered of curses and spirits angry at the encroachment on sacred lands. Desperate for answers, the park authorities reached out to an old investigator, me, Elric Graves. I arrived at the Mara Serena airstrip under the weight of a cloudless sky, the heat rolling off the savanna in shimmering waves. Despite the serene beauty of the grasslands, something felt wrong. The air tasted off. A ranger named Juma met me at the airstrip. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "Detective Graves," he said, extending a hand that barely concealed its tremor. "It's good you're here." "You've lost more than tourists," I interrupted, my voice gravelly from the long flight. "And you think the land itself is to blame?" Juma hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the sprawling plains. "It's not just the land. The Maasai elders, they're talking about the Tati." A name, whispered in reverence and fear. Tati. I had encountered whispers of it before during my studies of African folklore, a formless, malevolent entity said to haunt the boundaries between the physical world and the spirit realm. Stories painted it as a predator of wanderers, a shadow that fed on human essence. Yet, no 2 accounts agreed on what it truly was. "Show me where it happened," I said. Juma nodded, his face pale as ash. The drive to the Olololo escarpment was uncomfortably quiet. Juma, usually a confident man according to the reports, gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The landscape passed in a blur of golden savanna, punctuated by clusters of acacia trees whose twisted branches clawed at the sky. The closer we drew to the site, the heavier the air seemed to grow, pressing down on us with an almost physical weight. "Is it always this, still?" I asked, breaking the silence. Juma glanced at me, his lips a thin line. "No, detective. This part of the reserve is never quiet. There should be birds, herds of wildebeest, something. But here," his voice faltered. "Here, there's only silence." We arrived at the site an hour later. The safari vehicle stood exactly as described in the reports, its tires partially sunk into the soft earth as if abandoned in haste. The door on the driver's side hung open, and deep gouges ran along the metal, as though something with claws had raked it. A metallic tang lingered in the air, a scent I recognized instantly, blood, though faint and aged. I crouched by the tracks around the vehicle. There were footprints, unmistakably human, but they ended abruptly a few yards from the jeep. No signs of a struggle. No drag marks. It was as though they had simply vanished. "What did the initial search team find here?" I asked. Juma swallowed hard. "Nothing conclusive. But one of the rangers, Daniel, said he heard something while searching, voices, calling to him from deeper in the bush. Voices of people he knew. But when he followed them, Juma trailed off, his gaze darting to the distant horizon. He came back screaming. He's in the hospital now, catatonic." I stood and surveyed the area. The horizon stretched endlessly, its beauty marred by an unsettling void of sound. Where exactly did he hear the voices? Juma hesitated, pointing toward a cluster of trees shrouded in shadow. "There." He said it was coming from the forest. "Then that's where we'll start." The trees of the Olololo escarpment loomed like sentinels, their gnarled roots clawing at the earth. As Juma and I stepped beneath their canopy, the temperature seemed to plummet. The air felt dense, heavy with unspoken dread. I scanned the ground, hoping for some clue, a torn piece of fabric, disturbed foliage, anything. But the forest seemed untouched, as if nature itself had refused to acknowledge what had passed through here. Juma walked a few steps behind me, his breathing shallow. "What do you know about the Tati?" I asked as we pressed deeper into the woods. Juma hesitated. "Stories from the elders. They say it's not a creature, not in the way we think. It's something else. A shadow that takes the form of your worst fear, your greatest regret. It feeds on those who are lost, physically or spiritually. That's not very reassuring. It's not meant to be." The sound came suddenly, breaking the silence like shattering glass, a low, guttural hum, rising and falling in rhythm. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that crawled under the skin and settled in the marrow of your bones. "What is that?" Juma whispered, his hand resting on the machete strapped to his hip. I held up a hand to silence him, focusing on the sound. It wasn't just noise, there was a cadence to it, a pattern. Words, barely discernible, spoken in a language I didn't recognize. And then, a new sound joined it, laughter. High, shrill, and utterly inhuman. Juma's resolve broke. "We shouldn't be here," he stammered, backing away. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to stay. "Whatever this is, it won't stop until we understand it. Until we stop it." The laughter grew louder, closer. Shadows shifted among the trees, moving in ways that defied the angle of the light. And then, just beyond the edge of my vision, I saw it, a figure, tall and indistinct, its form flickering like a mirage. It stood motionless for a heartbeat before vanishing into the dark. We emerged from the forest an hour later, shaken but unharmed. Juma refused to speak, his eyes fixed on the ground. I couldn't blame him. The figure I'd glimpsed had been no ordinary predator, its presence felt ancient, primal, as if the land itself had birthed it. Back at the jeep, I inspected the claw marks again. Something about them felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. I retrieved a camera from my bag and photographed the marks for later analysis. As I worked, Juma stood at a distance, muttering under his breath. "Juma," I called. "Are you all right?" He didn't respond. When I approached, I saw why. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, as if he were staring at something far away. And then he spoke, his voice flat and monotone. "It sees you, Graves. It knows your name." A chill ran through me. "Juma? Who sees me?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he collapsed, his body convulsing violently. I knelt beside him, shaking him awake, but his lips only moved to form a single word, over and over. "Tati. Tati. Tati." Juma was rushed to a nearby ranger station, his body limp and fevered as they laid him on a cot. The medics murmured among themselves, their expressions grim. I stayed by his side, listening as he muttered in his fevered state. His voice was faint, like a distant echo, but the word remained the same, Tati. The Maasai elders arrived at sundown, their colorful shukas stark against the dim interior of the station. The eldest among them, a man named Oloishur, approached me with an expression that bordered on pity. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice as deep and steady as the earth itself. I nodded. "A glimpse. A shadow in the trees." Oloishur gestured for me to follow him outside, away from the rangers and their hushed whispers. The air was cool, the sky an endless canvas of stars. We stood in silence for a moment before he spoke. "The Tati is not a creature of flesh. It is older than these lands, born of curses and despair. It preys on those who wander without purpose, those who have lost their way, physically or in their hearts." "What does it want?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "To consume," he said simply. "It feeds on what makes us human, our hopes, our fears, our memories. It leaves nothing behind. And these tourists? Were they taken? Oloisher's gaze darkened. If the Tati has claimed them, they are lost. Unless. Unless what? There is a ritual, he said, his tone heavy with reluctance. But it is dangerous. It requires a bond with the land, an understanding of its pain. If you attempt it and fail, the Tati will take you instead. I stared at the elder, the weight of his words sinking in. I've faced monsters before, Oloisher. This one won't be different. But he shook his head, his expression grave. This one is different, Elric Graves. It already knows your name. That night, I sat in the station's small common room, poring over my notes. The claw marks on the jeep, the whispers in the forest, Juma's sudden collapse, none of it fit neatly into any lore I'd encountered before. The Tati wasn't a Wendigo or a skinwalker, it was something else entirely, a shadow that thrived on absence. The room was silent save for the faint crackle of the station's old generator. Then, just as I was beginning to piece together a theory, I heard it again, a voice, soft and lilting, coming from outside. Elric. I froze, my pen hovering above the page. The voice was familiar yet wrong, like a song played out of tune. Slowly, I stood and moved to the window. The savannah stretched out before me, bathed in moonlight. Nothing stirred. Elric, come. The voice was closer now, insistent. It wasn't coming from the savannah, it was coming from the shadows just beyond the station. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin. Who's there? I called. Silence. Then, a low, guttural hum, the same sound I'd heard in the forest. It vibrated in the air, seeping into my bones. My hand went to the revolver at my side, but I didn't draw it. Whatever was out there wasn't something I could shoot. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a shape, a figure, tall and thin, its edges flickering like smoke. It had no face, only a void where its features should have been. Yet, somehow, I felt its gaze pierce through me. Elric Graves, it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. Why do you seek what is already lost? I stepped back, my heart pounding. What are you? I am what was. What will be? What lingers, it replied. And you, are mine. The figure lunged, its shadowy form stretching toward me. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut just as the room plunged into darkness. The generator had failed. The station was plunged into silence, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. I lit a lantern and turned to find Oloisher standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. It came for you, he said. Yes, I replied, steadying my voice. It spoke to me. It knew my name. Oloisher nodded gravely. Then there is no time to waste. If we do not act, the Tati will consume you before dawn. He led me to the station's storage room, where he produced a bundle of herbs, a small clay pot, and a knife with a bone handle. The ritual is simple but dangerous. You must summon the Tati and confront it. Bind it with your will, or it will bind you. And if I fail? Then you will join the others, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But you are not without allies, Graves. The land remembers those who walk it with purpose. It may yet lend you its strength. I nodded, gripping the knife tightly. Whatever the Tati was, it had already marked me. There was no turning back. The ritual began at midnight, under a sky that seemed unnervingly empty, its stars dimmed as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Oloisher and 2 other elders had guided me to a clearing deep within the reserve, far from any human structures. They moved with the quiet confidence of those who understood the land's mysteries, yet I could see the fear in their eyes. This is where it must happen, Oloisher said, pointing to a natural depression in the earth surrounded by ancient baobab trees. The ground was bare, its soil dark and strangely cold beneath my boots. What do I do? I asked, gripping the bone-handled knife tightly. Oloishur knelt and began arranging the herbs in a circle, chanting softly in Ma, the language of the Maasai. He gestured for me to step into the center of the circle. You will call it. Speak its name with intent. But beware, Elric Graves. It will test you, and its tests will feel real. I stepped into the circle, the air growing heavier with each breath. Oloishur handed me the clay pot, its contents a pungent mixture of ash and blood. Mark yourself with this. It will anchor you to the physical realm. I dipped my fingers into the pot and smeared the mixture across my forehead, the scent almost overwhelming. The moment the substance touched my skin, the world seemed to shift, the wind died, and the night became unnaturally still. Begin, Oloishur said, stepping back into the shadows. I took a deep breath, focusing on the name I had heard whispered again and again. Tati, I said, my voice steady. Tati, I summon you. At first, nothing happened. Then, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and a low hum filled the air. Shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, coiling like smoke. The hum grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of whispers, each voice distinct yet indistinguishable. And then it appeared. The Tati materialized at the edge of the circle, its form flickering like a faulty projection. It towered over me, its silhouette unnaturally elongated. Its face, or the void where a face should have been, turned toward me, and I felt a pressure on my chest as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. Elric Graves, it said, its voice layered with countless tones. You dare to summon me? You've taken lives, I said, my voice firm despite the fear coiling in my stomach. You've brought despair to this place. I'm here to stop you. The Tati tilted its head, a gesture almost curious. Stop me? You cannot stop what is boundless. What is eternal? It stepped closer, the shadows at its feet spreading like ink. As it moved, the whispers grew louder, burrowing into my mind. Faces flickered in the darkness, faces I knew. My mother. A friend I had lost in Prague. Juma, his vacant eyes staring into the void. Do you see, Elric Graves, the Tati whispered. I am everything you have lost. I am your failure, your regret. And I will devour you. The clearing dissolved, and I found myself standing in a place I recognized immediately, a narrow alley in Prague. It was raining, the cobblestones slick and gleaming under the dim light of a gas lamp. Before me lay a figure, crumpled and lifeless, blood pooling beneath them. It was Joseph, the friend I had failed to save years ago during a case gone wrong. The memory came rushing back with brutal clarity, the vampire I had been tracking, the trap I had set, and the moment Joseph had stepped into it, unaware of the danger. You let him die, the Tati said, its voice echoing in the rain. You failed him. And now, you will fail again. I dropped to my knees beside Joseph's body, my hands trembling. The guilt I had buried for years clawed its way to the surface. I didn't know he'd be here, I muttered. I didn't. You did, the Tati hissed. Your hubris killed him. The alley began to collapse, the walls closing in, the rain turning to blood. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus. No, I said through gritted teeth. I made mistakes, but I've carried them. They don't own me. The Tati's laughter was a sharp, grating sound. The scene dissolved, leaving me back in the circle. But I knew this was only the beginning. The shadows twisted again, reshaping the world around me. I stood in a familiar living room, the scent of lavender filling the air. It was my childhood home, and in the center of the room sat a figure I had not seen in decades, my mother. She smiled, her hands outstretched. Elric, she said softly. You've been gone so long. I froze. The last time I had seen her, she had been on her deathbed, her body ravaged by illness. But here she was, vibrant and alive, her voice warm and soothing. Mom. Come here, she said, her smile widening. Let me hold you. I took a step forward, the weight of years of grief lifting from my shoulders. But something stopped me, a faint, almost imperceptible wrongness in her voice, in her smile. I hesitated, and her expression darkened. "Don't you love me, Elric?" she asked, her voice now tinged with malice. "Haven't you missed me?" The shadows around her began to writhe, her form distorting. Her eyes turned black, her smile stretching unnaturally wide. "Stay with me, Elric," she said, her voice now a guttural growl. "Let the Tati take you." I stepped back, drawing the knife from my belt. "You're not my mother," I said, my voice firm. "And I don't belong to you." Her form disintegrated, the shadows retreating once more. The shadows enveloped me once more, their weight pressing against my chest like a vice. When the world reformed, I stood in a place that should not have existed, my study, cluttered with the remnants of a life dedicated to the pursuit of the unknown. But the air here was suffused with dread, the walls warped and pulsating as though alive. On the desk lay my journal, its pages fluttering in a non-existent breeze. But it wasn't the journal that held my attention, it was the figure seated across from it. It was me. Or rather, it was something that wore my face like a mask. Its features were too perfect, its movements too fluid, as if mocking the frailty of my own humanity. The copy's eyes glimmered with a malevolent intelligence, and it smiled as it leaned back in the chair. "You've done well, Graves," it said, its voice an uncanny mirror of my own. "But this is where it ends." I stared at the doppelganger, my grip tightening on the bone-handled knife. "I've seen your tricks. This won't work." The thing that wore my face chuckled, the sound cold and hollow. "Oh, but this isn't a trick, Elric. This is truth. You've built your life on chasing shadows, hunting monsters, and yet, you know the greatest monster of all is the one inside you." "I've made peace with my demons," I said, stepping forward. "Have you?" it asked, rising from the chair. "What about the lives you couldn't save? The villages you've left behind, their people broken and scarred? What about the times you doubted yourself, wondered if you were nothing more than a scavenger of misery?" Its words hit harder than any physical blow, dredging up memories I had buried deep, faces of the innocent caught in the crossfire, the moments I questioned whether my efforts made any difference. The shadows around me grew thicker, feeding on my hesitation. "Don't you see?" the doppelganger continued, spreading its arms. "You are me. And I am you. And the Tati will consume us both." I closed my eyes, shutting out the figure's taunts and the oppressive darkness. I thought of the people I had helped, the lives I had changed, the moments of hope I had seen even in the bleakest circumstances. The Tati's power was in despair, but despair was only part of the human story. "You're wrong," I said, my voice cutting through the shadows. "You're not me. You're a reflection, a distortion. And you don't own me." The doppelganger snarled, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. I raised the knife, the blade catching the faint light that pierced the darkness. "This ends now." With a surge of resolve, I drove the blade forward, plunging it into the heart of the shadow. The figure let out a deafening scream, its form unraveling into tendrils of black smoke that writhed and dissolved. The clearing returned, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. The shadows receded, and for the first time, I felt the presence of the Tati weaken. I dropped to my knees, the knife falling from my hand as exhaustion overtook me. Oloishur approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. "You did it," he said. "You faced the Tati and survived." The clearing was quiet now, the air filled with the scent of the herbs still burning faintly in the ritual circle. The oppressive hum of the Tati was gone, replaced by the distant sounds of the savannah, the call of hyenas, the rustle of wind through the grasses. Life was returning to the land. Juma was recovering when we returned to the station. His fever had broken, and his eyes were clear, though he remembered little of what had happened. The other rangers whispered of what they had seen, their fear giving way to cautious hope. Will it return? Juma asked me as I sat by his cot. I glanced at Oloisher, who stood nearby, his expression unreadable. The Tati is weakened, I said. But it's not gone. It never truly leaves. It's part of the land, just as fear and hope are part of us. But for now, this place is safe. Oloisher nodded. The ritual binds the Tati, but it is the choices of those who walk this land that keep it at bay. Respect the earth, and it will protect you. Lose your way, and the shadows will find you. I left the Maasai Mara the next day, the memories of the encounter lingering like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. The elders had promised to watch over the land, to ensure that the balance remained intact. But I knew this was not the end of the Tati's story. As the small plane lifted off from the dirt airstrip, I gazed out at the endless savanna, its beauty unmarred by the darkness I had faced. The Tati was a reminder of the fragility of the human spirit, a force that thrived on despair but could be countered by resilience and connection. And as I closed my eyes, I heard its voice once more, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. We are not finished, Elric Graves. I returned to London, but the Tati didn't stay in the Maasai Mara. Or rather, its memory didn't. Though its immediate threat was contained, whispers of its influence seemed to follow me. In dreams, I walked the endless savanna again, hearing the voices of those I had lost, those I had failed. At first, I dismissed it as the lingering effects of a traumatic encounter. But then the dreams grew sharper, more insistent. I saw places I hadn't been, dense forests, crumbling ruins, and faces that flickered like dying embers. Each time, the same voice whispered. Elric, we are not finished. The message was clear. The Tati had been wounded, but not defeated. One night, as I pored over notes from my past cases, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and the voice on the other end spoke quickly, its urgency cutting through the static. Detective Graves. This is Dr. Evelyn Kamani. I've been trying to reach you. It's about the Tati. I hadn't told anyone about the ritual or the shadow I'd faced. Yet this woman spoke as if she knew everything. Dr. Kamani, I said, leaning forward, how do you know that name? It's spreading, she replied, her voice tight with controlled panic. Since your confrontation in the Mara, there have been disturbances. People disappearing in Amboseli, whispers in the Rift Valley. Elders say it's stronger now, angrier. You didn't banish it, Graves, you provoked it. A chill settled over me. The Rift Valley was vast and ancient, a place where humanity itself had first walked. If the Tati's reach extended there, it could spread far beyond Kenya. What do you need from me? There's a Maasai shrine, she said, an old one. It's said to be a tether to the spirit world, a place where the Tati's kind can be bound, or destroyed. But it's deep in the Chyulu hills. Dangerous terrain, and no one dares to go there now. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. I'll come, I said. Send me the details. 2 days later, I stood at the foot of the Chyulu hills, the volcanic ridges rising like jagged scars against the horizon. Dr. Kamani had met me in Nairobi and arranged for supplies, but she insisted on staying behind. I've seen what happens to people who get too close, she said. This is your fight. A guide named Kiprotic, younger but with a quiet intensity that suggested experience, had agreed to accompany me. He carried a rifle and wore a talisman of carved bone around his neck. For protection, he said when I asked about it. Not that it will help much. The trek into the hills was grueling. The sun baked the rocky terrain by day, and the nights were bitterly cold. As we climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and the silence deepened. Even the wildlife seemed to avoid this place. On the third night, as we camped in a narrow gorge, the whispers began. Elric. Elric. Kiprotic froze, his eyes darting toward the shadows. Do you hear it? He whispered. I hear it, I said, gripping the knife at my side. Stay close. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the rocks, weaving together into a low hum that vibrated in my chest. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting just beyond the firelight. And then, a voice, clear and taunting. You should not have come. At dawn, we reached the shrine, a jagged outcrop of blackened stone that jutted from the earth like a skeletal hand. The air here was suffused with an almost suffocating stillness, as if the world itself held its breath. Scattered around the base were bones, animal, human, and something else I couldn't identify. This is it, Chyulu said, his voice trembling. The elders spoke of this place. They said it's where the veil is thinnest. I knelt by the bones, examining the markings etched into the stone. They were symbols I didn't recognize, but their intent was clear: protection, containment. They had been carved with purpose, yet many were broken or incomplete. It was sealed once, I said, tracing a hand over the symbols. But someone, or something, opened it. The ground beneath us trembled, and the air grew cold. The Tati's presence was here, stronger than I'd felt in the Mara. I stood, gripping the talisman Oloisher had given me. Stay close, Chyulu. This isn't over. As we explored the shrine, a shape emerged from the darkness, a figure draped in tattered cloth, its form hunched and unnatural. It moved with a slow, deliberate gait, its head tilting as it regarded us. You seek to undo what was done, it rasped, its voice like dry leaves in the wind. Who are you? I asked, stepping forward. I am the keeper, it said. Bound to this place, a guardian of its secrets. But the Tati has broken free, and I am no longer its master. Then help us, I said. Tell us how to stop it. The keeper laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You cannot stop it. You can only bind it, if you are strong enough. But be warned, mortal, the Tati knows your name. It will offer you what you desire most. And if you falter, it will take you. The keeper's words echoed in my mind as Chyulu and I prepared for what lay ahead. The shrine pulsed with an unnatural energy, the air thick with tension. Around us, the bones seemed to whisper, their faint murmurs intertwining with the hum of the Tati's presence. What do you think it meant? Chyulu asked, his voice barely audible. That it will offer what you desire most. I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew. The Tati wasn't just a predator, it was a manipulator, a creature that thrived on the frailty of the human spirit. It would test me, just as it had before. The keeper stepped forward, its twisted form casting a long shadow over the shrine. The binding ritual will draw it fully into this place, it said. But you must be the anchor, Graves. The Tati must focus on you. And then what? I asked, gripping the talisman around my neck. Then you endure. The keeper handed me a vessel carved from black stone, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. This will hold its essence, if you are strong enough to wield it. The ground beneath us trembled, and the whispers grew louder. Shadows swirled at the edges of the shrine, coiling like serpents. The Tati was near. Elric, the voice came, soft and coaxing. Why do you resist? The shadows coalesced into a form, tall, flickering, and monstrous. It was the Tati, its void-like face fixed on me. Around it, the air shimmered with distortion, as though the creature bent reality itself. You could have stayed away, it said, its voice a haunting melody. Yet here you are, clinging to hope. Do you not see the futility? I steadied myself, clutching the black stone vessel. You've taken enough. It ends here. The Tati tilted its head, a gesture almost human. Ends? Oh, Elric Graves, nothing ends. Not for you. Its voice shifted, softening, becoming familiar. It was my mother's voice. Don't you wish you could see me again, truly see me? I can give you that. The figure morphed, taking on her shape. She stepped toward me, her eyes full of warmth and sorrow. You've been so alone, Elric. Let me ease your burden. Let me bring you peace. I staggered back, my resolve faltering. It wasn't her, I knew that. And yet, the ache in my chest was undeniable. Chyulu shouted, snapping me back to reality. It's a trick, Graves. Don't listen. The Tati hissed, its illusion shattering as it surged forward. The shadows lashed out like tendrils, slamming into the boundaries of the shrine. The runes flared to life, holding the creature at bay, but only barely. I stepped into the center of the circle, raising the vessel high. Tati! I shouted, my voice ringing out over the din, I bind you to this place. By this land, by its people, and by its will, I cast you out. The creature recoiled, its form flickering violently. You think you can contain me, it snarled. You are nothing but a man, a frail, broken man. The shadows surged again, battering the runes. The ground beneath me cracked, and a jagged tendril lashed out, striking my chest. Pain shot through me, but I held my ground, gripping the vessel tightly. The Tati shrieked, its voice a cacophony of rage. You will never be free of me, Graves. I will haunt your every step. Maybe, I said through gritted teeth. But not here. Not now. I plunged the vessel into the center of the circle, the runes blazing brighter than the sun. The Tati's form was dragged toward it, its howls splitting the air. Shadows tore away from its body, dissolving into smoke as the vessel absorbed its essence. When the light faded, the shrine was silent. The Tati's form was gone, its presence reduced to a faint hum within the black stone vessel. I collapsed to my knees, my chest heaving with exhaustion. Chyulu rushed to my side, helping me to my feet. It's over, he said, his voice shaky. You did it. The keeper stepped forward, its hollow eyes fixed on the vessel. It is contained, it said. For now. But beware, Graves. Such power cannot be destroyed, only held. The vessel must never leave this place. I nodded, my hands trembling as I passed the vessel to the keeper. What happens if it does? The keeper's expression darkened. Then the Tati will be free once more. And this time, it will not stop. We descended the Chyulu hills the next day, the air lighter but not entirely free of tension. Chyulu was quiet, his gaze often drifting back toward the shrine. I couldn't blame him. We had seen something that defied understanding, something that would haunt us both for the rest of our lives. Back in Nairobi, Dr. Kamani met us at her office. She listened intently as I recounted the events, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. You've bought us time, she said. But the Tati is a force older than this land. It will find cracks, ways to influence the world even from its prison. I know, I said. But for now, it's bound. That has to be enough. As I boarded the plane back to London, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The Tati's whispers had quieted, but its memory lingered like a shadow at the edge of my mind. The keeper's warning echoed in my ears. It knows your name. And I knew, deep down, that the battle was far from finished.